This is our third video in the first principle of brains prioritizing fear over everything else. And in this video, we'd like to talk a little bit about the things that we see in families that tell us that they are positively utilizing this principle, as opposed to the previous video we talked about the negative.
Negatives, yes. And, as we've said before, commonalities between families, that these things are going to be present, whether they're negative or positive, they're going to be present.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in this video we're going to point out two of the points that signal to us that the family's on the positive road with this development.
So you want to lead off with the first one?
Yeah, the first one is parents' ability to recognize and verbalize emotions.
A full range.
A full range of emotions. So I think that's the cue for you to talk about. Is it the list of 52 emotions that we see on Therapist's Door?
No, we narrow it down to 4 emotions: happy, sad, mad, and scared. And we recommend people recognize that full range of emotions you're talking about, they all fall into these 4 categories or combinations thereof. We make it simple like that because the part of your brain you're trying to change is the limbic brain. It doesn't have the limbic brain doesn't have a huge vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Your vocabulary is up here. So what we want to do is we want to keep it very simple when you have these thoughts, because I think that increases the impact on the limbic brain.
I know from past history and doing outpatient, I once had a flip book that it's like, are you frustrated, or are you this, or are you that? And people will get like, well, I don't know, maybe a little this, maybe a little that. It takes a lot of time just to, and then how accurate are you? But when we're able to say to a person or to family members, so are you feeling sad or are you feeling scared? And, it makes it much more simple.
Eventually it makes it simple. And I'm always amazed that we walk into families, and even healthy family systems, a lot of times they don't have mechanisms to really label and talk about fear. It's just sort of, there seems to be an underlying assumption in our culture these days that we just sort of minimize that or skip it.
Yeah, well, so many parents don't want their kids to be afraid.
Right. And the idea is I can't talk about my fear without scaring my children.
Right.
And of course that's a terrible idea, because we're the models. We are the models
Yeah.
for them.
Well, I know growing up, my parents never had this emotional discussion. I was taught to cook and clean and be good in schoolwork and all of that, but emotions were just not present. I mean, we never talked about them.
Mm-hmm. It's a very powerful thing for a child to hear a parent say, well, I have a part of me that's feeling fear right now about this, and this is what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then making adjustments in their life so that the child can see that.
Yeah.
So the first thing we encourage families to do, and the first positive thing that we like to see, is we like to see them be able to slow down their emotions to the point where they can put it to words, and identify the emotions, and then actually verbalize what they're doing about them. This is so important because emotions fly through us so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't get in the process of slowing them down and really taking control of them, they can run away with us, and we can wind up in all kinds of different places we don't want to be as far as parenting goes.
You mentioned slow down. Our society is not key to that.
Mm-hmm.
If we're slowing down, we're using some kind of electronic device.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in touch with ourselves and what's going on. And I don't know how many parents who have worked with, especially moms, who say, oh, I never have time to sit down. I'm always doing this, that, or something else. And that is very preventative to being able to regulate your emotions, because you're always this in the squirrel cage kind of life. And some parents, it's like they, especially before COVID, were enrolling their kids into everything, just keeping that squirrel cage going. Mm-hmm. And now we're asking them to slow down, actually stop and experience what's going on inside of them.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we're not asking. What we teach our clients is that the number one skill that human beings have to manage their own emotions. Specifically, the problem one, of course, is fear, is to be able to verbalize it, to put it into words to a trusted adult. And in virtually every home that we walk into for service, we find that particular skill minimized, if not completely absent.
Yeah, there's that group of families we've worked with that they're just mad all the time, So it takes a lot of working back for that one. And then there's that also the flat affect families, the ones who's like they're so emotionally frozen that they really can't name what's going on inside.
Sure.
So we're asking people to slow down, but now we have these angry people we're asking to slow down, or these flat affect people to slow down and actually be open to the idea that they're having emotions.
Here's a silly one that I run. Families who don't talk about fear, but then take their child to a therapist and expect that child to suddenly have the skills to speak about their fear to a therapist.
Or the dreaded coping mechanisms. My kid has a whole list of
Everybody has coping mechanisms for anger, of course, and that anger is in fact a coping mechanism for fear.
Yeah.
That's another video. So the first skill, the first positive thing we see when we walk into families who are adequately taking advantage of this principle are they have ways to talk to each other about fear.
They can actually recognize it. They can label it. That
Exactly.
they're not disconnected from that part of their body.
Yeah.
That they can say, I am afraid of this. And they can be vulnerable enough to call Susie or their mom or somebody and say, I'm feeling scared about this.
Obviously, there are fears that you can't share with children.
No.
They're not ready for them. But in general, it's very important. We look for that. We look for that ability to verbalize and talk about fear. And how close is it to the normal, as opposed to being an exception? We only do it when things are really bad.
Yeah. Well, then you have that group of parents who say, oh, I can't let my kids know what I'm afraid of because that will scare them.
Now, the second thing that I look for is that ability that accommodates the experience of fear.
So when you say accommodates, what do you mean?
Well, do they create space in the environment?
So when you're feeling scared, do you give yourself space to experience that emotion?
Yeah. A child who has a very, let's say, I'm just going to make this up, a huge, important track meet that evening at 4 o'clock. Well, it's a normal human brain function, because brains prioritize fear, that the child would have a hard time focusing in their math class. It was the last period of the day.
Right.
Do we acknowledge that? Do we give our child space to say to a teacher, I'm really worried about this. Can I pick this up tonight? Or, something along those lines. And within homes, do we build it up? I mean, the child has 2 hours typically, or let's say make an hour of homework, or in my family, 5 minutes of homework. And, they can't do it because they have other plans to do, and they can't do it because their brain is saying, I need to get away from this school right now, schoolwork. And do we give them opportunity? Do we hold ourselves to a lower standard when we get scared?
Well, that's what I was going to say is for that child to be able to say, I'm feeling scared about this, so I need to do that. What did that kid need to have modeled by the parents to give the kid those kind of words? So it would be something like, dad or mom facing a challenge at work the next day and them saying, I'm going to take the evening off.
Exactly.
Because tomorrow's going to be a tough day.
Do we as parents adjust the environment within the family system to represent the fact that brains are going to prioritize fear no matter what?
Right. Especially with all the COVID things and grandma in the hospital or something. It's like, we're not going to be doing anything major this evening because we're afraid about grandma.
Now, the next thing I look for, and maybe this one could be first sometimes too, is just the ability to acknowledge fear. Just to say, ooh, that scares me.
because if you're scared, people see that as
Weak. Weak. And actually, again, because the first step to dealing with fear is to be able to verbalize it, to acknowledge it, it's actually very weak to not be able to talk about it. So we look for things like you mentioned earlier, when we say to them, well, it looks to me like you're feeling scared there. What we hope to hear, of course, is parents go, well, yeah, that's what I'm feeling. But a lot of times we won't get that. A lot of times what we get is, I'm not scared, I'm irritated.
Irritated and frustrated are two of the big ones that they throw out.
So just that skill to be able to, I'm feeling afraid about this right now. And some of the times it's so small that, just acknowledging it out loud. Oh yeah, I'm feeling scared right now. It can make a big difference in a family system, in a person.
So if, say, the parents are doing a good job at modeling, I'm scared about this, but it's hard for their children to acknowledge it. I always like Dan Hughes's curiosity, being able to say, boy, if I was in your shoes, I'm thinking this is the kind of thing I'm going to be feeling. So we can help our kids get to that place of acknowledging their fear, even when we're doing a good job at modeling. We can still help them.
Yeah. Once we model it, then we can encourage them to do it as a strength-based practice.
It is.
What about the use of self-care and the recognition that brains prioritize fear?
Oh, how many families have fought us over self-care? That is, and I know how many times you've gone in and say, go get a piece of paper. I want you to write down 10 things you enjoy, things you like to do. And how hard. It's been like a week assignment for some families just to come up with that. They lose the ability to find things that they enjoy.
One of the strangest, I think, examples of today's lifestyles is we want our children to be happy. We all want our children to be happy. And yet we as parents will sometimes work ourselves constantly to the point where we're exhausted, and we never show them how to be happy adults.
What happiness looks like. How many of the parents look like these bundles of anxiety when we walk in, or bundles of mad? We've gotten both combinations, but the kids don't know what it looks like. Yeah, you're right.
And when we talk about brains prioritizing fear, it's important to recognize that as you get older, triggers, you can't just make triggers go away.
No.
So that ability to be happy, use self-care, in the midst of a trigger is so powerful for young people to learn.
So you used a whole bunch of terms there that people aren't going to make practical. When you say using self-care in the presence of a trigger, can you just give us one example that stands out?
I made a mistake at work today, and I'm afraid my boss is going to yell at me tomorrow. Okay? There's nothing I'm going to be able to do from home to make the trigger go away. I made a mistake. My boss is going to catch it. He's going to be angry, and he's going to yell. Do I allow that trigger to ruin my evening at home
That you
with the
just
family?
sit and fuss and fume the whole time.
Or do I have the skills to get myself out of that scared part and enjoy my family that evening?
Right. And with the attitude, I will deal with whatever comes out of tomorrow. I have the strength to deal with that.
Exactly. Now this next one here, a lot of times everyone misses. But just the ability to reflect on successes.
Yeah. Well, I won't go back to Bloom's taxonomy, where in education you can go from being a concrete learner all the way up to evaluation. And so many of our kids are just, and one parent didn't, or I don't know, was surprised by the term regurgitate facts. That, how many kids are taking tests now just to spit out the facts, that instead of evaluating, to thinking and not analysis. We need our brains in those higher levels thinking skills. When we push this reflectivity, our brains are going places that it's very healing.
When I think of the principle of our brains will prioritize fear over everything else, what I see happening in these families is they they achieve a success, right? But before they even know it, their brain moves on to the next fear. And so they never take the time to celebrate the present success, which of course decreases the motivation to continue working. It's acknowledging successes makes your brain go, I want more.
Yeah.
I want more. But in families that have trouble with this principle, and well, I'll say it in a positive, families who take advantage of this principle positively, what they do is when they have a success, they take the time to celebrate it, to punctuate it.
Well, and it builds those memory pathways
Yep.
where they can go back and build on those successes. They don't feel like a failure all the time because now at least those are building blocks for more success.
And as in everything, if we as parents practice it and model it, then we teach it as strength to the children, and they in turn can use that skill to make their lives better.
So in this portion of our first principle, brains prioritize fear, we've pointed out two really important skills parents need. As one, to be able to recognize and verbalize their emotions, and then two, that they have the skills that they demonstrate those skills on how they're managing their emotions in a healthy way.
Intentionally.
Intentionally.
Intentional fear management.
Yes. So 2 good principles out of today. If your family is managing their emotions well, they're taking care of their brains, especially when they become afraid, they'll be able to recognize and verbalize their emotions and demonstrate the skills of managing those emotions.
Yep.
So, all right. Looking forward to the next video. Thank you very much.